I will now open this session number 7, Forward Through Collective Bargaining, EU Law and Policies, and it regards motion 1C. A central focus is public procurement and the digital action. Please also note that there are information in the conference platform. I would now like to invite the President of the Resolutions Committee, Erwin de Dijn, to introduce motion 1C. Please, Erwin, the floor is yours.
Merci, Peter.
Thank you very much, Peter. Dear colleagues, we're going to look at motion 1C, Forward Through Collective Bargaining, EU Laws and Practices. It is proposed by the Resolutions Committee. Collective bargaining is a key element for entrenching democracy, making society fairer, more inclusive, and to fight against inequalities. Collective bargaining, when it isn't hindered, can generate a win-win context where all parties, companies, and society are winners. Sectoral collective bargaining is the best way for defending and promoting workers' interests, the best way to secure as extensive a collective bargaining coverage as possible. It is good to promote collective bargaining at a cross-industry, national, sectorial, and company level when supplementing workers' rights and different forms of protection in line with national trade union approaches. The motion's objective is to ensure that EU laws and policies, including trade agreements, support collective bargaining within countries. EU legal instruments and policies must respect national collective bargaining structures and must not limit the autonomy of the social partners to engage in collective bargaining. Therefore, if this motion is accepted, Uni Europa will work together in mutual support of each other to strengthen collective bargaining and fight national and European policies that seek to weaken collective bargaining. The Resolutions Committee recommends that this motion be adopted. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Erwin. And notice that the ballot is now open, so you will have good time to cast your vote in this session. I have now the pleasure to invite Nicolas Schmidt, European Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights, as a keynote speaker in this session. Please, Mr. Commissioner.
C'est moi. Good afternoon, everybody. Dear Mr. Helberg, dear participants. First, I thank you very much for inviting me to participate into your conference. And allow me also to recall we are today a very special day. We are the International Workers' Memorial. And this is a day where we really think about all the workers who have been victims of accidents or of occupational diseases. And I think also that this is a very special day today because thousands of workers, and especially of workers you are representing in the services, have been victims of the pandemic, have been either very sick or have suffered a lot or have even died, and thousands of them have died. Partially because at the beginning, at least, of the pandemic, the protections were insufficient and the equipment was not there. So I think all these workers, we call the essential workers or the frontline workers, they are delivering an enormous service to our communities. And I really want to pay tribute to all of that. And especially these are a lot of people who are members of Uni Europe, cleaning sector, supermarkets, logistics. And as I said, they have been very much, many of them have been victims of the virus, victims of the pandemic. But also among them, we have very often very bad working conditions, low wages, and also precarious working conditions. And therefore, I think the focus on collective bargaining is extremely important, especially in this very period, and this a very special moment also for the European Union, because we are a few days away from the Porto Summit, a summit which should underline the importance of social Europe, of social rights, of implementing the social pillar. And among these social rights is the right to have collective bargaining. And we forget that this is not just a modality of wage setting. This is a fundamental right. This is a fundamental right in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, Article 28, which clearly states the right to collective agreements, to conclude collective agreements. Therefore, the Commission is really promoting the idea of collective agreements, especially for those workers who very often have no right or have no collective agreement. And the consequence of that are low wages, bad working conditions, difficulties in general to be represented, and also very often precarious working conditions. And it is important, especially also to for the essential workers, to revalue their work. We all have applauded the health and care work, but it's not about applauding, it's about clearly stating that the value of their work is extremely important for our society. And the best way, finally, to revalue their work is through the promotion of collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is an element, a central element of what we like to qualify as the European social model. And therefore, if we want to develop this European social model, by the way, many envy us for this social model. And many now try to copy it because they have understood that it keeps societies together, that it's not the contradiction of competitive economies, but it can show the way for very innovative and very strong economies. And therefore, we as Europeans, we have to promote this social model, and promoting it, we have also to strengthen collective bargaining, which has been weakened during the last decades for different reasons. Collective bargaining and efficient social dialogue has also proved crucial during the lockdowns in countries where workers and employers already had productive relationships. Compromises were reached quicker and workers could be protected faster and more efficiently. And this is above all also the case through the introduction of short-term work models, which have saved a lot of jobs, but which also has supported companies and which finally company to recover, to be ready for recovery. Collective bargaining is about wages, but it's not only about wages. It may be about working time, it may be about working conditions. It certainly should be also about skilling, reskilling, and upskilling, and especially in a period of big transformation. Green Deal, the green transformation, and the digital transformation. In this context, skills are essential. They are also the best way for keeping the job or for getting a new job, for job transition. Therefore, in the context of the recovery, and especially also putting an emphasis on reskilling policies and upskilling policies, we encourage very strongly, the Commission encourages very strongly the involvement of social partners in this also national recovery plans. Collective bargaining does not matter only for the present and for the recovery. It is the best way for wage setting. Allow me to quote, collective bargaining and workers' voice are key labor rights and important labor markets institutions that matter for job quality. Collective bargaining, providing that it has a wide coverage and is well coordinated, fosters good labor market performance. This is not a quote out of a trade union booklet. It is a report by OECD, and is a report called Negotiating Our Way Up, Collective Bargaining in a Changing World of Work. And precisely in this context of transformation, of big changes in the world of work, it is extremely important to strengthen again collective bargaining, collective agreements. We are facing now also new challenges, new ways to work, like telework. And this has to be dealt with by social partners, through collective agreements, through social dialogue. We have to establish a right to disconnect, because we see that there's a blurring between working time and free time, private life. But how to implement the right to disconnect? Again, here I think there is an extremely important role for social partners through collective agreements, through sectoral agreements or enterprise agreements. If collective bargaining has been on the declining trend for years, and coverage has indeed decreased, this is not only because, as I read very often, unions had a less important role. The membership of unions has also declined, but also because the economy has fundamentally changed. We have gone from big manufacturing to a much more service-oriented economy. Therefore, it's so important to have also a strong representation of workers in the service economy. But also we see new forms of work, non-standard work, platform work, where collective bargaining is very limited for the time being. There's more and more a gray zone. Should platform workers considered as self-employed, very often in reality bogus self-employed, should they have the right to negotiate collective agreements? This is a fundamental issue, because sometimes even they have been prohibited to have collective agreements for so-called cartel reasons. I think we have to sort this out. We have to find solutions. We have to give these workers the right to have collective agreements. The Commission is working on solutions to guarantee this fundamental rights also to platform workers and non-standard workers. We also have to make sure our response in terms of labor rights after the previous crisis, because we still, or a lot of people remember what happened after the last crisis, where collective bargaining rights were limited, and sometimes limited in a way in contradiction with ILO conventions. I think here we have learned the lesson. Hopefully we have learned the lesson, and we have really to change from previous situations and have the right conclusions for the future and for recovery out of this out of this crisis. And that's why the Commission is committed to reviving collective bargaining, because it is what makes an economy work for people, for all workers. It's part of the social market economy. There is no real social market economy without a strong collective agreement, a collective bargaining system. And I must say, it's the better way to set wages. And we see it, by the way, that those countries where collective bargaining is dominant, or even there's only collective agreements, wages are higher and productivity is high and innovation is high. So in that sense, also recalling what the OECD has concluded, it is the better way to set wages. Therefore, in a proposal the Commission has made on minimum wages, we have emphasized the importance of collective agreements, showing that finally collective agreements is the better way, also in comparison with minimum wages, even if these minimum wages might be decent. And when you read our proposal, it's Article 4 of this of our proposal. It's about promotion of collective bargaining on wage settlement. And we encourage all member states to promote collective bargaining, to promote the building and strengthening of the capacity of social partners to engage in collective bargaining, to encourage constructive, meaningful, and informed negotiations on wages among social partners, all that with full respect of the autonomy of social partners, but also in those member states where collective bargaining is low, and unfortunately there are many, it's the majority, and low I mean under 50, but we have finally considered 70% the coverage under which member states should really take special measures, enabling conditions for promoting collective bargaining, and to present an action plan together with, obviously, with social partners. So these are elements which we really are very keen on, and I think this is also an important element of the action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights, which will be in the discussion at the Porto Summit. But also, we all know that to have good collective bargaining, you have to have social partners, and therefore building up the capacities of social partners is important, and therefore the European Social Fund has financial means to strengthen the capacities of social partners, especially in those countries where collective bargaining is low and where social partners very often have not the means to organize sufficient. And in that respect, in that context, I had asked the former German Labour Minister, Mr. Nicolas, to prepare a report how we can finally strengthen social dialogue and especially also the capacity of social partners. Now, one last remark on public procurement, because public procurement is certainly an important tool to promote collective agreements and also to enforce the respect of collective agreements. Because we are talking here about a huge part of GDP, 13, 14, 15% of EU GDP goes through collective agreements, and therefore the rules, EU rules already require member states to ensure that contractors or subcontractors, public buyers, comply with collective agreements when they perform a public service. And therefore, there is the possibility to exclude companies or to sanction companies who are not doing so. So I think the same thing, by the way, should apply for minimum wages. As you would, however, agree, strengthening the legal framework is not sufficient on its own. We need a cultural shift. We need, above all, good implementation. And this is why the Commission is working closely with public buyers and encourage them to consider and achieve social impact through their procurement. We will also publish later this spring a Commission guide on socially responsible public procurement. And this will provide useful indications and examples on how to proceed in practice. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me reiterate the commitment of the Commission to stronger collective bargaining throughout Europe. As you often recall, it's not just a matter of economic efficiency, it is also a matter of democracy, of fairness, of better labor market organization. So I think we have to work together for a new spring for collective bargaining, and with an ambitious objective that in Europe, in all member states, the 70% target will soon be achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Commissioner. It was very good to that you took your time to speak to us. It's also good to see that the politics now discuss social Europe and collective bargaining as a central means of the world of work in Europe. I would now like to invite Frank Wernicke from Verdi in Germany to take the floor to speak on public procurement. Please, Frank.
Ja, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen und natürlich auch
dear colleagues and dear Commissioner Schmidt, I am very pleased to have the opportunity to speak directly after you, because what you are fighting for right now, the strengthening of the collective bargaining agreements and CLAs, we've been fighting for a lot in Germany. We started a campaign on a legally binding cross-industry minimum wage, which was then passed into law in 2015. Frank Brisker was a very important driving force in this fight. Over the years, there was fierce resistance from the employers and their political allies. But I have to be honest with you. The idea of the introduction of a statutory minimum wage in Germany was a controversial one among unions in Germany at the start. This was also because there were different parallel preconditions at the same time. There were industry sectors in which there wasn't even an employers' association with which trade unions could conclude a collective agreement. There were sectors with shamefully low wages, like delivery services. And then there were sectors in which the collective bargaining system is intact. not only in industry, but also in some services. Among the unions representing the industries in which the collective bargaining system was still working to some extent, there was fears at the time about political influence. There was a fear that a restriction of collective bargaining autonomy, and fear of a decline in the importance of the union. So there were many parallels to the current narrative in Europe. Today, in 2020, we know a bit more. We can report on the experience we have had, and there are also numerous scientific studies available. Where unions were strong before the introduction of the statutory minimum wage, they have remained strong. The autonomy of collective bargaining has not been damaged. And millions of people who previously had very low incomes have seen their incomes grow significantly, in particular in the services sector, for women as well, and people with a migration background benefited as well. And there have been a number of really successful collective wage agreements for quite a lot of sectors in parallel. Dear colleagues, I am quite sure that it is a good proposal to strengthen collective bargaining and also to enforce sufficiently high statutory minimum wage in the European member states. I think that all unions are going to be stronger everywhere, and the proposed directive has the potential to improve the living and working conditions of millions of people in Europe and give them a better income. It is no coincidence that the business lobby is going absolutely nuts about this. Our opponents sense the danger that their plan to maximize profits will be hampered by all of this. Colleagues, for all our differences when it comes to the details, let us look above all at the things that unite us. We are united in wanting to improve the situation for workers in the EU. Europe needs a pay rise. We agree that the trade unions have a key role to play in this. We want to achieve higher wages primarily through good collective agreements. And what is always our priority is to improve the living and working conditions of working people by developing our own strength, by developing fighting power. We are not believers in the state. However, we need a legal safety net to prevent poor wages. And we also agree that the EU must never again allow lower wages and weaken collective labor agreement systems as happened during the Euro crisis. That is why we welcome the proposal for the minimum wage directive. Finally, and this is an important tenet in all of this, we want to link up the awarding of public contracts in Europe to valid collective labor agreements. We're talking about an annual value of 2 trillion euros. Taxpayers' money must not be used to promote wage dumping and undermine collectively agreed wages. Europa is launching a campaign to this effect today. No public contract without a collective agreement. Let us show that our movement is united. Thank you very much.
I have now the pleasure to introducing our next speaker, a former active member of the Europa family and now a member of the European Parliament, Marianne Lind from Denmark. Please, Marianne.
Tusind tak for invitationen til at tale her i dag. Jeg ville selvfølgelig helst, at vi var samlet, så jeg kunne få hilst på alle jer, jeg kender. Og vi kunne bruge pauserne på at idéudvikle og vidensdele. Men det må blive en anden gang. Så er det også nyt for mig at være til en fagforeningskonference i rollen som parlamentariker.
So it's a new thing for me to be able to share this information as an MEP. As for years, I have participated in this conference as a trade unionist, and I took part in the third and fourth conference of Uni Europa with you before I was elected at the European Parliament. I was a trade union representative for many years and thus deputy president at the trade union HV. And I am first and foremost a trade unionist before I'm an MEP. I realized that the training wasn't adequate. I got in touch with the trade union and we finally managed to put forward our reivindications, our claims. Thanks to this small spark that was ignited at this moment, I started my trade union work. And I then became a trade union representative for the 400 colleagues. I therefore have a huge experience on this topic and have worked on companies. I made trade union representatives with 1,000 members, the priorities of which were equal opportunities, better working conditions on a precarious labour market. We therefore all realize that there have been huge changes on the labour market. We have fewer jobs with open-ended contracts, but our collective agreements are under pressure. But we have similar problems across Europe. Workers are being hired as freelancers. In fact, they're bogus self-employed workers. We have a number of workers who fill in jobs with contracts, short-term contracts, and even zero-hour contracts. And these workers don't know how much they'll be earning every week, and therefore they can't plan anything for their future. And I can carry on with a whole list of similar situations. We have a large swathe of atypical workers. First and foremost, self-employed workers in small companies, in large multinationals, in small villages and large cities, across all sectors. In Denmark, just as much as in the rest of Europe. This is why we need to focus our political attention to fight against precarious working conditions that in particular concern zero-hour contracts and closed contracts. We therefore need clearer rules that will prevent abuse from employers. Unfortunately, we still experience a gender pay gap. We're still working hard to put in place a gender equality. And hopefully some of the EU tools will be able to solve a part of these problems. At the same time, we need to call for better health in the workplace so that everybody can feel safe and for nobody to fall ill while performing their duties. Psychosocial work is also a cause of great stress. This is unacceptable. For people not to be able to go back home with a smile on their face after a day at work. The problems on the labour market cannot be resolved by politicians alone. As a trade union representatives, I know full well that we can't work against adverse working conditions if we can go into the companies themselves in order to react hands-on to stressful situations when they first arise. And I know that we can resolve the difficulties encountered by atypical workers only if we are able to reach out to people who are at the margin of the working market. I also know that we can only fight social dumping if we can reach out to as many workers as possible and include them in collective agreements, which allow these people to rise up above precariousness. As the trade unions together, we can solve the problems that all workers are facing on the European market, and I'm ready to fight with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. We now go across to Annika Rönni-Sellinen from PAM in Finland, who joins us by video to speak on corporate responsibility and public procurement. Over to Annika now.
Dear listeners, dear sisters and brothers, the time for voluntary corporate social responsibility is over. It is simply not enough that companies set their own criteria and indicators for social responsibility and then assess the achievement of the goals themselves. For many companies, promises of social responsibility are part of their marketing strategy. But to just promise the moon and the stars is not enough. We at Service Union United PAM believe that doing business has to be fair, for real. It is simple, not right, that company gains profits at the expense of people who work long hours in conditions similar to modern slavery. We have such examples even in Finland. Berry pickers from Thailand and Nepalese cooks who are victims of human trafficking. Promises of social responsibility need to be kept, and this is done most effectively through binding corporate responsibility legislation. That is why we at PAM promote ambitious and extensive human rights-based corporate responsibility legislation in Finland, as well as the Human Rights Due Diligence Directive covering the entire European Union. We need binding rules because multinational companies operating globally need to act responsibly everywhere in the world. Companies must comply with the ILO conventions and respect human rights throughout the international supply chain. That is the only way to ensure the sustainability of production chains. Human rights violations must be prevented proactively. And if that is not done by companies, at least the position of victims must be safeguarded and the suffering compensated. Workers' rights, the freedom to organize and the right to bargain collectively are the kinds of human rights that the trade union movement is particularly keen on, safeguarding and monitoring. That is why we are not just any odd stakeholders, but actually a party that needs to be consulted and heard in matters concerning social responsibility. Mandatory workers' information and consultation rights should be fully respected at national, European and global level, including through the involvement of the European Works Councils. The information should be timely and sufficient to support the active and efficient involvement in the process. The trade union movement has a special position in relation to, for example, other non-governmental organizations promoting ethical issues and social responsibility. We are specialists when it comes to the workers' rights and to the world of work. In Europe, national laws governing corporate responsibility exist so far only in France and Switzerland. In Germany and the Netherlands, legislation is being drafted in the same way as in Finland. A broad coalition consisting of Finnish trade union movement representatives, non-governmental organizations and companies managed to lobby for the law so that it was in fact included in the current government's target program in the spring of 2019. Yes, you heard right. Even a number of companies were included in this coalition. Those who understood the need to strive for an even playing field for everyone. Because if only some of the companies act responsibly, it distorts competition. At the moment, the preparation of Finnish law is well underway, and it should be completed during this term of office. the background group preparing the law has a strong trade union confederation representation. We still need to lobby employees in order to ensure that the law is ambitious enough. Consumers also play a key role. The kinds of product we choose to buy ultimately affect someone else's working conditions, pay, and even the right to organize and bargaining power. Therefore, we at PAM also underline the consumer perspective and educate our members on issues related to ethical consumption. There is still a lot of work to be done, but we at PAM believe that this is the right path towards justice and decent work for all. It is not right that there are companies that gain a competitive advantage through exploitation. The world needs solidarity and it needs binding regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika, and to all of our speakers. We will now take a short break and we will resume the session at 3:10. So welcome back, everyone. Let us resume this session. I have now the pleasure of welcoming Esther Lynch, the Deputy General Secretary from E2C, who will speak on union busting. Esther, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. President Peter, it's great to be here at Europa's conference, and what a great conference so far. Your message has been loud and clear. Every worker should have the opportunity to join a union and to collectively bargain for fair wages and decent paying conditions. I want to congratulate you on your valuable reports prepared for this conference, which show a full power recovery needs full power collective bargaining. And that's why the fight against union busting belongs to and is the duty of everyone. There are no independent bystanders. When governments ignore attacks on workers, that's not a neutral act. The only way to bust a union is to lie, distort, manipulate, threaten, and always, always, always attack. Each union prevention campaign, as the attacks on workers are called, relies on a combination strategy of disinformation and personal assault. Union busting is a field populated bullies who often very publicly attack the workers leading the organizing. The strategy is deliberate. It's to make an example of those workers. It's to point out and say, here's what will happen to you if you organize. And these employers never miss a chance to call upon their rights and often require the full force of the law, the active participation of police forces to enforce those rights and to enforce the employer's rights above the rights of workers' rights, and to legally justify, the employers legally justify preventing unions coming into the workplace, preventing unions speaking to the workers, preventing unions representing workers. And the EU is not without blame either. The EU single market and EU laws have been mobilized to deny the right to organize, bargain, and strike. That's why there is no more important struggle for us as a movement than making sure that every worker can join a union without fear, and to make sure that not only national, but also EU rules support that. That's why the ETUC is working to ensure that EU laws never again work against workers organising. And I'm here today to ask your help with that work. You heard yesterday from European parliamentarians their very real proposals. They've put them on the table. They're currently being debated in the European Parliament. Those proposals aim to protect the right to organise and collective bargaining. We've got to actively back politicians who are on our side. That means we need your help to lobby your MEPs. The next 6 months will be crucial. Action by everyone is needed. But not just in the European Parliament. At the same time, governments are very busy trying to undermine those important efforts by meeting in council. And we need to expose those politicians, expose those governments who make wonderful speeches about leaving no one behind, but at the same time, they're doing exactly that by undermining and removing from the directive on adequate minimum wages any meaningful provisions that protect workers by requiring member states to have an environment that supports collective bargaining, including a guarantee for unions to access workplaces, a guarantee for unions to get information, and a guarantee of real-time protection for workers who want to unionize. We need to work together, we need to stick together, and the ETUC is fully working with Uni Europa to put real pressure on governments to support the amendments that in the directive seek to ensure public procurement supports companies that have a collective agreement. I congratulate Oliver Rotig, your regional secretary, for his leadership on this. It's time to make sure that companies respect the right of workers to collectively bargain and that those companies are no longer put at a disadvantage. So in a nutshell, next 6 months, important to work together. Next 6 months, important to support those politicians who are with us. Next 6 months to campaign the parliament, to campaign the national governments, and to get the once in a decade opportunity put on the table in the European Parliament now to end union busting by having good provisions within the minimum wage directive. Sticking together, staying strong, we can win for workers. Peter, President, back to you.
Thank you very much, Esther. And now it's time to travel up north to Sweden and hear from Jens Saverstam from SECO in Sweden. And he will speak about the postal campaign and anti-liberalism. Please, Jens, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Peter. President, Congress delegates, postal workers are essential workers. Before the pandemic, this was challenged. Now European governments has included postal workers on the list of essential workers in the time of current crisis. And the importance of the post are once recognized. In the last years, post has been challenged in many ways. Some have predicted that post was the past, and liberalization, privatization, and digitalization would make the post and the postal workers less important. During the period when we were challenged, postal unions demanded the importance of developing new ways of working and to find new ways of using the unique network that reaches all citizens in every country in Europe every day. The pandemic has shown that we are right. There is a need to have a secure communication on a daily basis that every citizen can rely on. During the pandemic, deliveries of medication, food, test samples between hospitals and other necessary parcels were delivered. E-commerce is rapidly growing, and the pandemic has speeded up the trend. Letters are declining, but for many, post is still important and the only way to receive letters and parcels. But the increase of e-commerce and the possibility for revenues are attractive for new companies to enter the post and logistics market. These new companies, such as Amazon, as the biggest global player, are anti-union and want to perform deliveries to cheaper prices. In the post and logistics market, this means saving costs on wages and conditions for the workers. Here we need to act as trade unions. We need to organize. We need to fight for sectorial collective agreements. We need to work together to get the multinational to not start the race to the bottom on terms and conditions. We need to fight so that workers are not exploited and self-employed or as self-employed with no rights, long working hours, and low and unsecured salaries that are difficult to live on. Organizing is important. We need to organize, not only in the traditional postal companies. We also need to organize competing companies. We need to find ways of supporting each other, and the Europa organizing network is one way of doing this important work. This conference has a theme moving forward through collective bargaining. By signing CBAs, we represent our members and we build a Europe that is social and for the workers, not for the market. We need to organize a new entrance in the sector. We need to sign CBA with these companies. Sectorial CBAs is the preferred way. But if we don't get that, at least sign a CBA so we can keep the wage and condition level of the sector and also in the long run improve them. The EU Commission is planning for a fourth postal directive. Let's make one thing clear, that this directive needs to be for the postal workers and for the European citizens and not for the market. Let us protect the USO. Let us stop further liberalization on the postal market, and let's have passes and letters guaranteed as an important part of the European infrastructure also in the future. With this said, I would like to support the suggested adoption of the motion as suggested by the Resolutions Committee. Thank you for the floor.
And thank you, Jens. And now, speaking on social dialogue, I warmly welcome Joost Engeler, the president of Uneuropa Hair and Beauty. Please, you have the floor.
Involvement and feedback. Uneuropa Hair and Beauty is the European Union Federation for Hairdressers and Beauticians. We represent 17 trade unions in 13 countries. UNI plays a pivotal role in helping exchanging ideas and learning from everyone's realities. Thank you for that. And specific thanks to Dimitris and David for their daily involvement in Uneuropa Hair and Beauty. With their profession, often requiring close proximity to clients, hair and beauty salons were closed in most countries, making hairdressers and beauticians among those most economically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown periods have given hair and beauty sector a black eye. The sector has been bruised, heavily bruised. It remains to be seen how the sector will absorb this enormous impact. This Uneuropa conference is a great venue to hear and learn from your stories as countries and or as a sector. Because of course, there is not a one-size-fits-all reaction. Uneuropa asked me to share with you our experiences in constructing a fruitful social dialogue. Social dialogue is work, sometimes hard work, with setbacks, frustration, but thankfully also many great moments. Living in bubbles was something I think we all learned during this pandemic. Union work is working outside bubbles. It's trying to understand the difficulties one faces being ambitious in setting our goals with the intention of agreeing on a strong package between the social partners and the European Commission. I would like to focus on the Occupational Health and Safety Agreement agreed between the social partners in 2012. Faced with many administrative hurdles and procedural drawbacks, we revised this agreement in 2016. Occupational health and safety is, of course, a priority subject for all Uni-Europa sectors. That said, some sectors are more concerned with occupational health and safety aspects as they face higher incidence of health and safety risks. One sector in which social partners have worked intensely on occupational health and safety is the hairdressing sector. In the EU, there are over 1 million workers active in the hairdressing sector, mainly young and female workers. The sector is characterized by high prevalence of work-related ailments and high staff turnover due to occupational health and safety risks, among others. Our agreement contains occupational health and safety measures, ergonomic measures, and sets out principles of work organization. The Occupational Health and Safety Agreement in the hairdressing sector became a test case for the sector and for European social dialogue as a whole, faced by the institutional lack of decision in the European Commission and their intention of stalling the process of presenting a legislative proposal based on the agreement. Joint work between social partners in the sector and the European Commission showed there is a third way in between: 1, implementation through law, 2, by social partners on their own, and 3, namely on autonomous implementation by the social partners and the European Commission together. In that aspect, the hairdressing sector and the agreement can be considered a test case for European social dialogue and the social partners, who, with the support of European Commission, can pursue the implementation of its agreements by non-legislative means and the social partners' self-regulatory competences. Of course, what the best strategy is depends on many aspects. For our sector, the hairdresser sector, this third way was and is the best way to go forward in making change happen. If you have any questions on the agreement or strategy, please contact Dimitris, David, or myself. I thank you for your attention and wish you all the best on behalf of the Uni-Europa Hair and Beauty team. Thank you.
Thank you, Joost. At this point, we are ready to open the floor for discussion. And the first speakers are in order: Mick Rix from GMB in the United Kingdom, Ramona Pineros from the Comisiones Obreras in Spain, and Antonio Oviedo from UGT in Spain. And Mick, over to you first.
Congress President, on behalf of GMB Union in the UK, we are delighted to share our experiences with you in organising the gig and the Amazon economy in what is termed as the precarious economy. The last official figures for platform working in the UK showed that around 7.5 million workers had used some form of app technology at least once per week in sourcing work. What we have seen with the explosion of the gig economy is tens of thousands of jobs that would have been previously classed as employed work being converted to the bogus self-employment, non-unionised, precarious jobs economy. The moonshine liquor poured from the expensive PR and policy consultants of these companies justify their exploitation of workers by saying it is the workers' fault as they want flexibility. Then these companies seem to further exert controls on these workers. There are in excess of 30 million workers in the UK in the world of work today. Around 2.2 million are employed in some form of temporary or agency work. Over 1 million are on 0 hours contracts, and around 7.5 million in some form of precarious self-employed model. All in all, we could now have around approximately 10 million of the UK labour force in some form of precarious work with no rights to earnings, with no guaranteed hours. That is nearly a third of the UK workforce now under some form of precarious work. This is dehumanising work experience for many. The world of work was supposed to take people out of, not place them in poverty. We have all seen the statistics. When you have strong collective bargaining rights, coupled with the right to have access to organise, then we have a strong, growing and vibrant trade union movement. Yes, GMB Union have taken many of these so-called disruptors to court to secure... Sorry?
Now, as you can probably see, we have a slight technical issue. This is always one of the risks when doing these virtual conferences. We've all been on a steep learning curve over the last year or so since COVID, but absolutely there are still some points to iron out. While we're waiting to get Zoom back up and get back to our great speakers, let me talk you through a couple of things that we see going on. As always, we've got our join the discussion, join the conversation board, lots of things going on there. And we'll give a shout out also to Manuel Stolz from GPA Austria, because they're having a campaign on increasing taxes for millionaires, something we haven't dealt with too much yet in the discussion. But he says, our lives have changed, but not that for the millionaires. They're just as rich today as they were before the corona crisis. And do you think it's fair that the richest should make a contribution to help us pay the costs? I'm sure many of you will say yes to that, but if you want to, go straight to the join the discussion and give your thoughts and comments. Over on Slido, we also have a poll going on. You can go to Slido, that's slido.com or sli.do. Go there on your web browser. You can go there on your phone. There's an app if you want to download it, but you don't have to. Enter the code Uni Europa FWD, and you will see there the question. In your opinion, what is the main hurdle to tackle at EU level to improve working conditions and collective bargaining? Now, that's an open field, so you can write down whatever you want in there. And many people have been writing. As you can see, sanctions is the biggest issue. You can see it gets bigger and bigger the more people type the same thing. However, getting employers to the table, the rise of neo-fascism is a problem. Precarious working contracts are also an issue. You see here the neoliberal policy, not enough lobbying capacity, digital work, more members, a salary you can live on, bogus self-employed, equal rights, political engagement, an awful lot of different thoughts coming there. So please keep your thoughts coming in, because we will create this lovely word cloud full of lots of different ideas. Now, I also noticed back here on our discussion board, some of you couldn't hear the Commissioner very well. Unfortunately, he had some technical problems, but that gives me a chance to remind you that you can go here and find all the things pre-recorded. So if you missed the Commissioner this afternoon, you can watch him a little bit later on. I think we've sorted out our Zoom issues and we're ready now to go back to the speakers.
Buenas tardes a todas y todos.
Good afternoon, everybody. A heartfelt greeting from Comisiones Obreras in Spain. I'll try to summarize where we're at in my trade union when it comes to disconnecting digitally. A bit of history. On the 17th of December, we issued a law to protect personal data and guarantee digital rights, which recognizes for the first time in the Spanish regulation the right to disconnect, to respond to a need to clearly distinguish between life, personal life and work life. Among the UGT and Comisiones Obreras also signed a manifesto at national level on the 18th of January 1989, and we also signed it with Uniglobal Union and an annex to the international agreement that we subscribed to promote the right to disconnect. And finally, in July 2019, as part of Telefónica Spain, we issued a regulation with provisions that I'm going to present now. First of all, workers have a right not to reply to any communication, whatever the means used, whether it's an email, WhatsApp, or a phone call, once they have finished their working day. And those who are responsible for a team must comply with these digital provisions and make sure that these are respected. They should ensure that workers have the right to disconnect during holidays or tending to their personal matters during weekends or holidays. The company also guarantees the right to disconnect, even in the workplace and when working from home. A number of campaigns to raise awareness have been conducted in order to train and inform workers on the need to protect their rights while conducting their work. People have also been informed about training opportunities in order to learn how best to protect their rights. Just a few months before the pandemic, we had signed a new agreement. If only we'd known how much we would need this agreement and how much we would need to increase awareness about the right to disconnect. Technological advances have limited our working space, and working from home sometimes means that we have to give up space. Unfortunately, it's difficult to hear the speaker when the bell is ringing.
Hola, buenas tardes. Un abrazo afectuoso.
Good afternoon. Heartfelt greetings from FESMC UGT Spain. Talking about collective bargaining, sometimes monetary issues are linked to the market prices and only vary when their costs change. This regulation has tried to counter the second round of inflation for personnel, and it also has compromised the ability to collective bargaining. This is, in fact, a right that is constitutionally protected, and a number of regulations have been put in place to increase the competitiveness of companies, which has provided unfair competition for a number of sectors that, in fact, have the lowest wages and are suffering increased labour instability. Therefore, we're asking for an amendment of the regulation and a renewal of contracts in the public sector so that we can amend the prices in contracts as a consequence not only of the cost of labour that are unforeseen and that are a consequence of the regulations that provide for an increase in labour costs and collective bargaining within some reasonable criteria. In our view, if these changes aren't made, this will bring prejudice to collective bargaining and will entail a drastic reduction in the ability for companies to hire new workers in the service sector. Activities such as cleaning and security, which are essential for our type of society, and during the pandemic have shown the ability to sacrifice themselves, providing essential services in the healthcare system, the finance system, sector, and so on. Communications, security guards, etc. These workers are still invisible, have remained invisible behind the front line, but they do have a right to collective bargaining that is fair and that enables them to conduct their duties in the public sector. The current situation.
Thank you to Mick, Ramona, and Antonio, and our sincere apologies to Mick about the technical issues. Now we go over to Oliver, and he's going to address some concerns surrounding the stream and voting. So please, over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Peter, and apologize to all the delegates and participants in the conference that we have some technical problems in terms of the stream. It is sometimes very unstable, And I very much recognize that this was also the case when the Commissioner Schmidt was speaking. Though I have to admit, the stream from the Commission, the feed from the Commission was actually already bad. So that was not in the first place caused by us. There is a concern that because of the stream breaking up or not, that this has an effect on voting. We have reacted to this already, that first we extended the voting time from 2 minutes to 6 minutes. And what we have been doing now is that we send out the voting documents, already after Erwin, as the president of the resolutions committee, has put forward the motions. So on a very important point, the stream and the platform are in the end independent from each other. Even if your stream doesn't work, you should receive the voting notification so that you can vote. And now with the new system we are using, you have a good hour to do. So as soon as you see the message, please vote. That should then make sure that everybody can put in its vote. I also note that the last vote has the biggest participation, but we want to bring this up and want to make sure that everybody really can vote. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification, Oliver. And I think it's also time to check in with Jennifer again to see how the answers in the Slido questions about what is the main hurdle to tackle at EU level to improve working conditions is going. So please, Jennifer, let's hear about it.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. We've seen a few more entries since I spoke last. Let me find it over here on my media wall. We've seen sanctions, as I said, was the biggest one before, but we now see right to trade unions, equal rights, anti-labor laws, minimum wage, yellow trade unions, all turning blue, so all getting more votes, as well as, indeed, as you can see, more of these other comments around the edge here, brotherhood and so on. Just for a moment to go back here to our main platform, to reiterate what Oliver was saying there, you will find your notifications up here on the top of your platform. You will also find them over here on the sides. You've got two places where you can see the notifications that will take you through to the options to vote. So you can make sure that you keep an eye open for those. There'll be a little icon beside them if you have notifications, just so you don't lose them. Again, if you miss the commissioner, over here on this panel, on your left-hand side, there's a button called Watch It Again, and you can go in there and you will be able to, within 24 hours, see the previous day's recordings. So you shouldn't miss anything, even if you have a little bit of an unstable stream. On our Join the Conversation, we have people having discussions about all sorts of interesting things. We've got two comments now on zero-hour contracts. One from Russell Waterhouse saying the pandemic has shown that the gig economy and 0 hours contracts do not work for a massive proportion of those who are forced to accept them. How many people have died because of increased transmission of the virus due to people not being able to take time off work if they need to self-isolate? And also Sylvie Staniev has also said she's concerned about the 0 hour contracts. It's open to all kinds of abuse. Is it so common in the UK? What are the employers' justifications for signing this type of contract? And how can trade unions protect workers? Some interesting comments there. We're going to see some more, and so keep your comments coming. We're keeping an eye on it. Keep tweeting, keep sharing on social media. We do want to hear your thoughts. We want this to be as interactive as possible. But thank you very much. We're going to go back to Peter.
And thank you for that update, Jennifer. And we now reopen the floor. And first up in order is André Reuters from FNV in the Netherlands, Maria Nasikas from Unionen in Sweden, Johan van Eghem from Setka in Belgium, and Richard Bevalius from Handels in Sweden. And first it's André.
Okay. Dear Uni Europa Congress, I'm pleased to be here with you today. Equal work, equal pay, and equal protection. That's why collective bargaining should be required for self-employed workers. In the Netherlands, 1 in 8 workers is self-employed, more than 1 million people. The FNV organizes them, and we encounter them as hairdresser, cameramen and women, ICT professional, mainly professionals who exercise their talent. I kindly emphasize that self-employed provide their work everywhere, and not solely through online platforms, as stated by the European Commission recently. A level playing field for all workers. That's our main aim as FNV trade union. Equal work and equal income. A self-employed should not be cheaper than an employee. FNV has got experience with improving collective bargaining for self-employed, which is not easy, mainly due to the European competition law. We started in 2015 with a collective agreement on a minimum wage for musicians who do the same work as employees. According to the Dutch court, they could be regarded as bogus self-employed, and therefore it was not prohibited price agreement. Then in 2019, we agreed on a minimum rate of 150% of the gross salary in the architectural sector. This all leads to the Dutch Competition Authority to set up new guidelines. Self-employed workers who work side by side with one or more employees and who cannot be distinguished from those employees in the day-to-day business are not companies within the meaning of the Dutch Competition Act. So the cartel prohibition does not apply to self-employed persons. Thanks to the former experiences in my own sector, the public broadcasters, we agreed on a fair practice code for good commission. We agreed on a minimum rate for self-employed of 150% of the gross salary. It's an improvement for many of the self-employed in the sector. But we need more. The COVID-19 pandemic learned us how vulnerable self-employed are without social protection to rely on. FNV and I will strive with all of you within Unie Europa to improve the position of self-employed through collective bargaining on national and European level. Self-employed are not undertakings, but professionals who exercise their talent. Thank you.
Hej allihopa. Pandemin har satt det mesta.
Hello everyone. The pandemic has changed things everywhere. Some of us haven't met our colleagues for more than a year. We log in and log out from various digital meetings, virtual meetings, and do the best we can, living and working on the same space. Work has moved back to our homes, and we now have some challenges we can't avoid as a trade union. In Sweden and in global, domestic violence has increased dramatically, and that's very difficult to draw up a line between work and free time. And the trade union responsibility is still here, but domestic violence does definitely influence our work, especially when we work in our home where the violence takes place. But it's also very important for the victims that workplace used to be a free zone where you could build up an economic independence. And as a trade union, we can't avoid talking about domestic violence because it's inconvenient. It is inconvenient. Violence is inconvenient. But all statistics show that there at most workplaces are employees that are victims of violence. And statistics show that quite a few of our members are victims. Statistics show that quite a few of our members are victims, like I said. We don't have to know who they are, but we must make this part of the trade union work. So Unionen wanted to, when you analyze the risks of remote working, we should also take the risk of domestic violence into account. We must make sure that our shop stewards also can consult employees even when they work from home. Domestic violence is something that should be mentioned in all fora. We have to work to ratify the ILO Convention 190. We should work for respect and compliance with the Istanbul Convention concerning domestic violence. Thank you very much. Kamrater, kära kongressdeltagare. Redan i början av konferensen så kunde ni stifta bekantskap med den belgiska modellen. Den belgiska modellen vilar på tre pelare.
Consultation model that is based on three pillars: employer-worker relations, the mutual rights and obligations that are attached to that, and what is important is the salaries and the reception of wages.
Det belgiska systemet har lagt grunden för vår sociala trygghet och för alla våra kollektiva arbetsvillkor.
Organizations that are representative by reason of their membership. The self-unite, and large and medium-sized enterprises and smaller ones unite in representative employers' organizations. These are the constituent parts of our consultation arena. Every day we feel how the employers' organizations attack standard labor relations, job security, and income security. Of course, we offer resistance to that. We will not let our acquired workers' rights be put under pressure, let alone be dismantled. Or, as is the dream of every employer, be consigned to the rubbish bin. Preferably, they would pass on all their business risks to the workers. We do not want that type of world. Let us be clear that this is not the way for the federal BBTK SETCA. Recently, one of the Belgian employers' organizations advocated for a further step in social dumping. Third statute. As a socialist trade union, we say an absolute no to this. This Trojan horse that can only lead to a dismantling of the salary and working conditions of workers. We want the priority to be the fight against bogus self-employment and the statute of platform workers, and I deliberately call them platform workers, is important. There must be an unambiguous answer to that with the presumption of employee status and a reversal of the burden of proof. Dear comrades, exploitation in the 21st century reeks remarkably like that of the 19th century. Thankfully, we have unions to protect workers now. Comrades, let us continue to fight with all our might. Fight for decent work, decent income. And that was it.
Γιώργος Μότσιος, εκπροσωπώ την Ομοσπονδία Τραπεζοϊπαλληλικών Οργανώσεων Ελλάδος. Είμαστε σε μια νέα εποχή, με μεγάλες αλλαγές και ανατροπές σε όλο τον κόσμο και στην εργασία. Αλλαγές που οι εργαζόμενοι τους εκλαμβάνουν ως απειλή για τα δικαιώματά τους στην εργασία, τα δικαιώματά τους στη ζωή. Το ερώτημα για μας, για τα συνδικάτα, είναι πώς αντιδρούμε σε αυτές τις αλλαγές. Πώς αντιδρά το συνδικαλιστικό κίνημα για να διασφαλίσει...
Yes, the issue is how the trade union movement is reacting to ensure our first priority is how workers Δεν τον ακούω. Δεν ακούω. Sorry, there is a sound problem. A deep economic crisis. His microphone is not working. Now it's okay. Το μικρόφωνο του δεν λειτουργεί. In 2010, we had a big attack against collective agreements, sectoral collective agreement.
Ήταν δίπλα μας σε αυτή τη δύσκολη περίοδο.
Our country has experienced a very difficult period, and the rights were undermined. Today, in OTE, we have specific positions for collective agreements in Greece and collective bargaining. It's to conclude a new sectoral collective agreement. Secondly, the extension to collective agreement, especially to companies that are servicing NPLs. Sorry, his microphone was not working.
Yes. Tack för ordet.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Dear Congress delegates, the workers in Europe have the right to secure work. That means good conditions. This means a salary you can live of, reasonable working hours, and a good working environment. Unfortunately, development is moving in the opposite direction for quite a few people working in the service sector today. Gig workers, platform workers, they can hardly ever get the protection they should have according to legislation and collective agreements. To stop this development, we need a proper strategy on how to improve the conditions for this group of workers. We also need a good strategy on how to organize them. This demands that we work on various levels. One way could be to work to actually make sure that legislation and agreements should be accessible for all workers, even if they're not employed. Social security and labor law are two areas where the EU member states and the social partners have an exclusive competence. But the labor markets are different in different countries, so we need different measures. But the false self-employed and other precarious conditions must be fighted against through the European trade movement. We also have to increase the organizing for the most precarious group of workers, because that's the only way that we can actually guarantee safe jobs, a safe work employment without diseases, without harassing, and not until then can we actually make sure that the workers in Europe have the fundamental rights on the labor market. Thank you.
And thank you to all our speakers, and sorry for the interpretation problem there in the middle. And before going on to our next point, we go back to Jennifer briefly.
Very much, Peter, as we've plagued by gremlins and these technological things as we often are. But it's worth pointing out that we have a comment on digitization here from Bianca Cuccinello from Italy, saying that the introduction of digital devices and tools in workplaces can provide many new opportunities and possibilities to organize work in a flexible way to the benefit of employers and workers. At the same time, this may create risks and challenges around the delineation of work and personal time. Something worth bearing in mind as we wrestle with all these digital tools here. However, before we move on, I do want to mention just one last petition. We've talked about the other two. We talked about Reclaim Your Face, about the potential downsides of algorithmic and biometric working together. We talked about the right to cure. And our final petition up here under the resource center on your platform is Save Our Post. Postal workers have been keeping us connected through COVID-19, yet right now the future of the services is in danger. And this is a petition to the European Commission that's reviewing the EU postal regulations at the moment. So go sign that. You have those 3 petitions there under Resource Center on your platform. With that, Peter, back to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. As we mentioned yesterday, we will now discuss EU draft legislation on a minimum wage and promoting collective bargaining. I invite Oliver to introduce the statement of support, which our executive committee adopted on Monday for endorsement by conference. So over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Peter. On Monday, the Executive Committee adopted a statement for a EU legal framework for decent wages and promoting collective bargaining. I now like to present the statement to conference for endorsement. Here, key points of the statement in summary. All of us agree that the most effective way to achieve the goal of a fair wage for every worker is sectoral collective bargaining. What governments and the EU should just thus prioritize is concrete action to ensure an appropriate framework to this end in each and every member state. The statement reiterates our support for the ETUC position on the matter as adopted by the ETUC Executive Committee in October 2020, and before that, agreed by the Union Executive Committee. The ETUC key objectives are establishing a threshold below which statutory minimum wages must not fall, and secondly, and more importantly, promoting collective bargaining as a main way to set wages. We as Union Europa are adamant that EU legislation must not undermine national collective bargaining systems. The Union Europa Conference backs in particular the amendments proposed to the Commission's draft legislation on a minimum wage by the co-rapporteurs of the European Parliament's Employment Committee. We heard yesterday evening Dennis Radke, who is one of them, and tomorrow morning we will have in the greet and meet session Agnes Jongerius, who is the other rapporteur. As Union Europa, we call on our affiliates to support the ETUC campaign that the ETUC has launched, establish a framework for minimum wages and strengthen collective bargaining systems. And we call in particular on the affiliates to participate with their own activities in the planned week of action from 3rd to 8th of May. I also would like to make very clear in our Congress conclusions, conference emphasizes the autonomy of collective bargaining and the Nordic model especially. We expect every EU institution to do the same. We cannot have this EU draft proposal or any other one undermining well-functioning collective bargaining systems, like in Scandinavia, but also in Austria, Italy, and Belgium. Together, we stand up to defend and improve our collective bargaining systems everywhere. That is the message of the statement that the Executive Committee proposes for your endorsement. Now, on a technical note, as I was saying before, we have sent out the ballot papers for motion 1C, as well as for the statement immediately after the President of the Resolutions Committee introduced motion 1C. However, the vote is still on. You should have received the you should not have received the documents are available and have been available on our SpotMe conference platform. So you should have all the information in place. And now I give back to Peter, and then we can continue with the process and then the voting as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I now open the floor for discussion. And first it's Linda Palmetsofer from Handels in Sweden, and then Barbara Taiba from GPA in Austria. So please, Linda.
Tack. Thank you so much. So my name is Linda Palmetsofer. I'm chairman for Handels in Sweden. With this conference, we really show that the international struggle at the trade union level continues, although the forms have changed. But comrades, this campaign and struggle must be performed very carefully and with respect to all our differences. We are talking about minimum wages is not such an example, because it doesn't matter how we try to see the things, the victory for one part becomes the loss of another part. I don't want us to be shattered. We have to be unified for trade union force in the world. I have complete understanding and respect for the fact that many of you think that minimum wages on the EU level is the right way. We have different systems and legislations to perform our struggles in, but in the Nordics, the question of minimum wages really touches the core of our force, because a directive of minimum wages becomes a threat for the well-being of our members. And the model we have in the Nordics stands and falls with the labor market parties discuss these things, especially when talking about wages, because for us, the question of minimum wages becomes a question of the survival of this, which we have fought for so many years in the trade union. And if the politicians are going to set up the conditions instead of the workers themselves, but we understand that the Nordic model is not universal, and we know that trade union work is about giving and taking. So maybe we can find a compromise when doing things together. And we would have liked to have a compromise here, so we could have accepted a declaration where the Nordics are accepted from the minimum wages demand. But as it looks now, we are not going to be able to vote for this. We don't want to hinder anybody to do what is right for your members, but we just ask you to do the same for us, to respect us. We are strong when we are unified, but not in what makes us different. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen, dear colleagues, we believe that the minimum wage directive is a huge chance that will impact income for people and have an impact on workers who are union or not. In Austria, we have quite a high CLA coverage, much like in the Scandinavian countries, more than 95%. We support this directive in Austria. We believe that if you have a dismantling of collective labor agreements in neighboring countries, we will also come under pressure. And it's all about being mutually supportive of each other beyond our borders. What we cannot accept is that we help without helping when we hear about stories. So I would like to urge you to support this statement, and we will try and find compromises And so that is why I would like you to support it. And as a union movement, and when we have employer organizations that run counter to this directive, I think that that is not good, and that is why I think it's a good thing to have a directive. We're hoping for support. It's about reinforcing minimum wages and reinforcing collective labor agreements throughout Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now would like to pass the floor to Uni-Europa Vice President William Monnier from SNRT CGT in France to make a summary. William, please.
Merci Peter. Bonjour.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, dear comrades, dear colleagues. This motion that we have debated regarding collective bargaining and the policies in the European Union has as its main objective to allow Uni-Europa and the millions of workers it represents to carry on playing an important role in putting pressure in creating policies at European level. It aims at reinforcing the role played by Uni-Europa and its power in negotiating in favor of workers. The various speakers have demonstrated the importance of a positive trade union action at European level with the aim of establishing a rich legal framework in order to debate at a sectoral and intrasectoral level and influence national decisions while countering social dumping to the detriment of the entirety of workers. This action has become even more necessary because of the digital revolution, the changes in the services sector, and the flexibility required of workers, as well as the new types of work. One of the points that was raised during this motion and that was highlighted by many speakers during this debate, a point that will be developed further under point 2 tomorrow, is acknowledging the status of atypical workers, freelancers, and bogus self-employed workers, namely the most precarious workers for many member states in the EU. I'm saying most of them because the Netherlands and other countries are more advanced in this sense. We therefore need to step in when it comes to when the Constitution is debating Article 153 of the Treaty of Rome in order to improve the working conditions of platform workers, where Uni-Europa, in agreement with this convention and the resolution of the ETUC for 2020, and will need to make sure that a binding legal framework is put in place in order to protect platform workers and atypical workers, including their unemployment benefits, pension rights, and a decent wage. Uni-Europa will also be able to clarify the status of workers that are not included under Article 101 of the Treaty of Rome regarding free competition, and will also ensure their right to negotiate and take part in collective bargaining. This is why, dear colleagues, dear comrades, I recommend the adoption of this motion if it hasn't yet been adopted. Thank you.
Okay, so now it's time to vote on motion 1C, EU law and policy. Just to be clear, once again, I would like to say that even if the vote has been open for quite some time now is the time to vote if you have not done it so far. So please vote for the motion in favor, against, or abstain, and for the endorsement of the statement for an EU legal framework for decent wage and promoting collective bargaining, please vote in favor, against, and abstain. So it's 2 votes for the motion and for the statement.
And while you are voting, let me show you once again, you will have the notifications here on the top and on the left-hand panel. As you can see, I've got a little 2 there telling me I have 2 notifications. And as I come here, you can see the ballot 7 vote now. You can click on that and it should take me through. Yes, so there's the vote on the motion there and vote on the statement for an EU legal framework for decent wages and promoting collective bargaining. In favour, against, abstain. You should all know what you're doing now, so do follow that. While I'm up here on the hub, I will take a chance to show you some of the articles that have been published in the last days. So we go to the Resource Centre, scroll right down to the bottom, past our petitions, and you will see here a list of articles that have been published in association with this week's event. Service sector unions call on the European Commission to change the €2 trillion public procurement rules. Time for the EU to put an end to bogus self-employment in platform work. Uni releases principles for collectively bargaining to advance remote workers' rights. Amazon's unrestrained power is a threat to the European social model, and so on. Do take time to read those. They will reinforce a lot of what you've been hearing here over the last couple of days and following along online. So make sure you check those out. They're absolutely invaluable resources for you. We also have here on our exhibition stands, just to remind you, you can go let me close that. You can go back to your exhibition stands and have a look at those representations and those presentations that are coming from the different associates. Back on the discussion board, we had a couple of comments in from Fernando on Commissioner Schmidt's statement. He said he made a very politically correct speech, but what we need now is deeds and not just words. And speaking of deeds, you've all voted. So let's go back to Peter for the results of that vote.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And I'm actually just waiting to see the clarification on my screen. And now it comes here, and motion 1C is passed. Let's see also for the statement. And the numbers will be presented on the platform during the conference. So just for now, the motion 1C is passed. And see if we get something for the statement also. Yes, and now here it comes. It has also passed. So both votes has passed. Now for the digital action. We want to use this gathering to also mark a key moment, and that is the launch of our public procurement campaign. And now over to Oliver, who will explain more about this campaign.
€2 trillion is spent every year by governments and public institutions across the EU for goods and services delivered by private corporations. That is 14% of the EU's GDP. This money can play a determining role in lifting working people's conditions. However, too often this money fuels a race to the bottom instead. Public procurement rules are skewed to favor price over all other considerations. Under these circumstances, corporations consistently turn to undercutting working conditions by suppressing the workers' fundamental collective bargaining rights. This must change. Last month, we sent a joint letter to the European Commission, but that was just the beginning. We are calling for the public procurement to be made conditional on companies having collective agreements with their workers. There's an opening for this to happen, but it won't happen alone. We need to make it happen. To do that, we must build momentum throughout Europe to apply pressure and shape alliances with decision makers. That starts now. Over to Jennifer.
Very much, Oliver. And we have seen lots of people getting involved in this online. This is one of those real times when actually social media serves us a great benefit. The hashtag here is procuring decent work. We're seeing, you can see here that the main poster that we can share that will get people involved, that people can click through to the Action Network. SIPTU there in their health division, Ireland's my own home country there. We've seen many of the other trade unions posting about it, sharing it. John Burns has just signed to show his support. You can share that. There's a pre-written tweet that you can put out there saying that you've signed it to show your support. Workers must have a say. Stop using public money to fuel a race to the bottom. There's other hashtags you can use. Obviously, you can use the Uni Europa FWD hashtag. You can also hashtag social rights and EU Social Summit 21 if you want to get that word out to more and more people. Of course, you can click through to the link itself here, and you can see no public contract without collective agreement. You've got point here that you can share your name, your last name, your email, and where you're from. If you're not subscribed, you have options here to subscribe or not subscribe to support this whole action. As I said earlier, this is in replacement of the physical in-person action that would have taken place had we all not been forced online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So do please do this. It takes only a moment of your time and will really have wide-reaching results. With that, I think I can hand back now to Peter, who is standing by. Peter, I hope you've already gone on and signed online.
Well, maybe when I'm off duty from being sharing this session, maybe I will do that, absolutely. Thank you for this. And now let's watch some videos of members of the European Parliament's support for us.
We want action now. We call for change to EU public procurement rules. No public contract for companies without collective agreement.
We need to work together to end the race to the bottom on public procurement.
Workers and trade unions in our industries are confronted to exploitation or social dumping on a daily basis. It is a scandal that many of these abuses take place on construction sites paid with public money.
Procurement based on quality criteria and long-term sustainability, not the lowest cost, is a powerful tool to drive standards up. We all lose, and tax dodgers, polluters, union-busting companies win contracts.
Together with Uni Europa and other European trade union federations, we will continue the fight in Europe for stronger collective bargaining at all levels.
Bidding for services solely in the view of the lowest price leads to a downward spiral in quality and increases the precariousness of the workers.
It should be based on who will do the best job. It shouldn't be based on who will do the cheapest job, because they will pay rock bottom and have cutthroat conditions of employment.
To make this happen, we need you. We will not stop until we succeed. Join us.
Public procurement accounts for 2 trillion euros each year.
Over 30% of the EU's GDP.
This money spent by public authorities can be used as a force for the good.
Can play a determining role in setting standards across all sectors of our economy.
Currently, the EU only requires member states to take one thing into consideration when awarding contracts to private companies: the price. The result is that public money has driven some companies to cut corners in order to get ahead.
Too often, the working people who actually do the work are the ones who pay the price. Cleaners, care workers, contact center workers, postal workers, and so many others have been brought in to help contain the pandemic. It's time they were listened to.
We are joining workers' unions from across Europe to call on the European Union to give workers a say as a condition in public procurement. Public contract must only be awarded to companies that respect their workers.
No public contracts for companies
without a collective agreement. It's time to change
the rules of the game
for more people-centered approach.
No public contract for companies
without collective agreements.
And thank you for that. It was not just MEPs, it was also representatives for the TUFs I saw. Now over to something completely different, as they say. The document with the executive committee nominations, the nominees for vice presidents and the nominees for auditors will be posted on the virtual platform. And this is on our agenda for endorsement tomorrow. Later today, remember that the MEP session at 1700 with Kira Marie Peter Hansen from Denmark will be on. Thank you. And with this, we will wrap up this session and we will take a short break and we will have a 10-minute break and see you back 25 to 5 then. Okay, thank you.
You okay, Peter? Good
yeah, yeah, thank you. It's always
you kept the ship afloat. Well done, buddy. Well done.
Perfect. And I will be back soon with my speaker.
Collective bargaining is crucial.